Do Christian countries fall under a protective blessing of prosperity so long as they follow God? In my last video, we compared some of the most secular countries in the world with 20 of the most religious countries and found that the secular countries were better off on average for every single metric that we looked at. You can check that video out in a link in the description below. But religious could mean any religion. Some of those countries were majority Muslim or Buddhist, and some Christians might claim that they're not prosperous because they're cursed for following false gods, or simply lack the Christian work ethic.
A tidal wave of industry that produced the world you see. It's called the Protestant work ethic.
So what happens when we look at just the Christian countries and compare them to the secular ones? In this video, we'll isolate out the top 20 most Christian countries in the world, according to Pew Research, and see how they compare to the top 20 secular ones, right after this intro. When I was a kid, my parents told me that the reason that Haiti was so poor was because its people chose to follow the devil and practice voodoo witchcraft rather than follow Jesus. And without some kind of Christian revival, they were cursed to live outside of the blessing of God. So when I visited Haiti years later, what I actually saw there blew my mind. But we'll come back to that. First, I want to take a scientific approach and see if there's actually any evidence for Christian prosperity and divine blessing. Now, quick distinction. I'm not talking about the prosperity doctrine put forth by pastors like Paula White and Kenneth Copeland, where they promise God will make you personally rich the more that you give them money, which is really giving God money, which they then spend on fancy cars and private jets and... I'm rich. Most Christians see right through these slime buckets and despise their "you can get rich quick by giving me money" tactics.
Give me your fucking money!
No, what I'm talking about is the belief that God blesses Christian countries at the nation level, so long as everyone faithfully follows him in solidarity. Do Christian countries fare better than secular ones? Well, first, I had to find out which countries were the least religious, so I took data from a massive Gallup poll performed in 2009, asking thousands of participants from 114 different countries if religion was an important part of their daily life. To get the list of the top Christian countries, I pulled census data from Pew Research, and then I compared the two lists on 10 different metrics of prosperity, development, and well-being. I'll be covering the results in this video, but if you need a more in-depth explanation as to what these metrics are, how they're calculated, and what they measure, I recommend watching part 1 of this video, and I'll also be doing a follow-up going into my methodology and getting into a lot more of the technical stuff. Part 1's where to start though. I'll put a link in the description below, and it breaks down everything in a way that even if you have no experience with this stuff, you can understand. Otherwise, if you've already seen that one, or if you have a background in economics or political science already, here's what I found. In terms of overall wealth, measured in GDP per capita, the non-religious countries produced almost 5 times more per person at $28,415.82 per person per year, while the top Christian countries were far more likely to live in poverty. The Christian countries also scored significantly worse in terms of income inequality, meaning that the wealth that they did produce was more likely to be consolidated mostly in the hands of a wealthy few people at the top, while the rest of the population scraped by. This can often be a sign of possible corruption, which the Christian countries also ranked incredibly poorly in by comparison to the non-religious group. When it came to freedom of expression, things were a little bit more close, but the secular countries still took the lead with significantly better press freedom. In terms of violent crime, the Christian countries, which you'd think would be all about turn the other cheek and love your neighbor as yourself and love your enemy, actually had 3.23 times the homicide rate of the secular countries.
Killing spree.
And education-wise, people in the Christian group were 11% more likely to be illiterate. The life expectancy in secular countries was almost a decade longer than the Christian countries, largely thanks to better medical care and lower infant mortality rates. After all, babies in Christian countries were 4.71 times more likely to die before reaching their first birthday than infants born in the non-religious countries. Now, there's a statistic that the anti-atheist pro-lifers don't want you to know. And I'm not talking about embryos or fetuses. These are fully formed human infants. And the children born in secular countries were also far more likely to receive more time/attention and better education from their parents because they had an average of 1.6 times fewer siblings to compete with for those things. When women are given control of their birth cycle and not treated like baby mills, they tend to pump out fewer kids and invest more in the ones that they have, which also helps curb overpopulation. Given just how much worse the Christian countries ranked on all of these metrics compared with the secular ones, it's no surprise that they also self-rated their happiness/contentment levels significantly lower than the people in the non-religious nations. They were asked where they would currently place themselves on a hypothetical ladder, where the top step, number 10, represents the best possible life to them, and the lowest step represents the worst possible life. The Christians put themselves an entire rung lower, meaning that they were far less satisfied on average with their current lot in life. Now, despite the fact that the most Christian countries on the planet were way worse off on every single metric compared to the most secular ones, pastors still spread the disparaging trope that atheists and apostates are to blame for a country's woes. Remember at the beginning of this video how I said that my parents blamed Haiti's poverty on voodoo and devil worship, an extremely one-dimensional view of political science? Well, they weren't the only ones.
Something happened a long time ago in Haiti. They were under the heel of the French, and they got together and swore a pact to the devil. They said, we will serve you if you'll get us free from the French. It's a true story. And so the devil said, okay, it's a deal. And they kicked the French out. You know, the Haitians revolted and got themselves free. But ever since, they have been cursed by one thing after the other, desperately poor.
What my parents didn't tell me was that Haiti was almost 90% Christian.
You sneaky mob!
Compare that to the US today, which is only about 65% Christian. While there are elements of voodoo and traditional religions that have kind of mixed their way in, that's not why they're poor. Haitian slaves were forced to convert to Catholicism back in the 1700s, and voodoo was completely outlawed until 1934. Its practitioners are still periodically persecuted and driven underground. Even as recently as 2010, the disastrous earthquake that killed over 200,000 Haitians was blamed on voodoo sans? I was never taught that the US refused to acknowledge Haitian independence because their slave revolt made US slaveholders uneasy, or that the US and France embargoed Haitian exports for 60 years before France forced Haiti to pay 150 million francs in reparations for the slaves that they lost. It took Haiti, once the richest island in the Caribbean, until 1947 to pay it off. Meanwhile, the US occupied and ruled Haiti for 19 years before supporting a brutal Haitian dictatorship, the Duvaliers. Jean-Claude Duvalier robbed his country blind and drove it into the ground while cozying up to the Catholic Church of his childhood, inviting Mother Teresa to visit and receive the prestigious Haitian Legion of Honor Award. And while it's true that voodoo traditions over the years have blended together with Catholicism in Haiti into a syncretic mix, when I visited, I didn't see altars, animal sacrifices, or people dancing in possessed trances. I saw church after Christian church on every single street corner. I saw people in the streets circling in front of a church singing what was described to me as songs of worship, while inches away a homeless boy lay sleeping in the muddy concrete streets. And although Christianity had been forced upon them from the time of their ancestors' slavery and sugar plantations, and had been used to exploit and control them, here was a country that still desperately clung to the Christian faith, hoping for some kind of divine blessing. I couldn't help but feel furious on their behalf. No matter how much they've been lied to, blessings don't come from above. The simultaneously terrifying and yet empowering truth is that if we want our states, our countries, and our world to prosper, we have to do it ourselves. The data is in on that front. And if we want our neighbors from all across the world to succeed with us, prayer does jack. We have to extend a helping hand. If you found this data interesting and you want to talk with me a little bit about it more, I'm actually launching a Discord server. I'm kind of new to Discord, so go easy on me, but like go and join the server, and it's going to be a blast heading over there and talking with you guys here in just a little bit. I'm also releasing a video on Islam and how it compares statistically with the secular countries. I'm going to have all of this in a data set that is linked below. I've got all my resources downloaded and archived. I also have links to all of it. You can go in and explore and look at it and play around with it. I also welcome you, if you're a content creator and you want to use this data, go right ahead. I just ask that you cite this video as your source. The other day, I posted a wish list of items to help my workflow and improve my studio, and I wanted to give a big thank you to the people who've bought me items off of it so far. If you haven't already gotten one yet, I will be sending personal thank you messages in the next couple of days. And if any of you still want to help the show out, I've added a few more items to the list and we'll be posting it in a link below this video. And if you found this valuable and you want to support my work and help me to continue making content like this, you can support me with an ongoing pledge either on patreon.com/holykoolaid or on Subscribestar, or you can make a one-time donation on PayPal. This show is fan-funded, so even just a little bit helps a lot, and it's because of patrons and donors like you that I'm able to do this full-time. So thank you so much for that, and as always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid.